following is a work of fiction and should not be taken as actual history.
Meet Professor Roger Hill, historian, adventurer, and raconteur extraordinaire. He travels to parallel worlds where history went differently and brings back lectures on his findings. So grab a prime seat, pay attention, and take good notes. This is Alternate History 100. Welcome to the class.
Good morning. Back in high school, I had a history teacher named Mr. Celsius. I don't know if he was related to the guy who created that crazy European thermometer, but Mr. Celsius was not a proponent of the great man theory of history. He tended to see history as a series of waves and inevitabilities. I remember being assigned to write a paper called "Was the Russian Revolution Inevitable?" And for him, the answer to that question was always yes. And in his class, if you wanted to pass, you told him what he wanted to hear. Unlike me, I believe that interpreting history is very much a matter of opinion, and I will brook disagreement with my views if you can support yours with evidence. Now, I wanted to test Celsius's view of inevitability by looking at the Civil War. One of the waves that led to that conflict was the Mexican Cession. So I decided to go to a world where the Mexican Cession didn't happen, just to see how things went in an America that never acquired California. Let's begin at a point where that world and our world were on the same history. It's the year 1821, and Mexico has just gained its independence from Spain. Viva Mexico! There were big celebrations, fireworks, piñatas, the birth of a nation. And then reality set in. Independence meant not having to take orders from 3,000 miles away, but it also meant no more money from Madrid. Their allowance had been cut off. They were on their own, and Mexico needed money. Now let's remember that the nation of Mexico at that time was modern Mexico, plus the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and part of Colorado. And the Spanish had never done much with all that land. Does anyone smell the opportunity? So Mexico sold plots of land in Tejas, yes, that's what it was called, to Americans. And huge numbers moved in and quickly became the majority of the population. And they brought with them strange foreign ideas like freedom of speech and innocent until proven guilty. In 1833, a group of colonial leaders met to establish a constitution for a new Anglo-dominated state within the nation of Mexico. Once that constitution was written, they sent Stephen Austin to Mexico City to present it to the government. Mexican President Santa Anna refused to grant statehood to Texas and threw Austin in prison on charges of treason. When Austin got out, he knew there was no choice but rebellion. There were only a few battles in this rebellion. You already know about the Alamo, where the defenders were massacred by a Mexican army that took no prisoners. There was the Battle of Gilead, where once again the Mexicans took no prisoners. And then there was the Battle of San Jacinto, where the Texians, yes, that's what they called themselves, made a surprise attack, captured Santa Anna, and forced a surrender. The rebellion ended in victory. Texas broke away from Mexico. What you may not know is that, for the next 9 years, Texas was a country. They had ambassadors and everything. And then, in 1845, they decided to join the United States. And that is the point of divergence between our world and the one I visited. In our world, President James Knox Polk sent an envoy named John Slidell to Mexico to negotiate the border and to make an offer to buy California and New Mexico for $30 million. But Slidell was not received by the Mexican government, so Polk sent troops to the disputed area of Texas, between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. Mexican troops fired on the Americans and gave the United States cause to go to war. It was a war that kind of went badly for Mexico. They wound up losing 500,000 square miles of land. Essentially, that was California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado, and they didn't get $30 million for it. But in the other world, the Mexican government did receive Slidell. And while they did not agree to sell California and New Mexico, they did cede the land between the two rivers in Texas, reasoning that it was simply not worth fighting over. So no Mexican troops fired on American soldiers, and America had no cause to go to war with its southern neighbor. The new situation was both celebrated and reviled on both sides of the border. In America, proponents embraced the Texas annexation and the peaceful acquisition of the disputed lands, while opponents feared that Texas would be broken into 4 new slaveholding states and thus change the balance of power in the Senate. In Mexico, proponents were glad to have avoided a war that they knew they could not have won, while opponents decried the cession of the disputed land between the rivers and the joining of Texas to the United States. They had never recognized Texas as an independent nation and still thought of it as being theirs. Much like the way China of our modern world looks at the democratic nation on the island of Formosa. Fuel was added to the fire when American settlers in California began to rumble. This caused elements of the Mexican government to worry that they were about to see a West Coast sequel of what had happened in Texas. One Mexican legislator stood up in their Senate and said of Americans, "They're bringing crime, they're rapists, we're going to build a wall. It's going to be a great wall, like the Great Wall of China, to keep them out. And we'll make America pay for it." Okay, no one actually said those words, but the sentiment was there. Mexico was determined that the Texas Rebellion would not have a sequel. So immigration from America was sharply curtailed, and a number of troublemakers were deported. But this did little to stem the tide, as large numbers of illegal aliens still managed to find their way to California. So Mexico took the one effective step that it could take. In order to prevent Americans from becoming the majority of the population, the government gave free land to any Mexican nationals willing to settle in California. This did not please the wealthy California families who already held title to most of that land. But it did have the desired effect, flooding the region with new people who had no desire to join the United States. Yes, it worked. For a while. But in our world, what's the name of San Francisco's football team?
The 49ers!
Yes, the 49ers. I lost big on them last season. And who was that team named for?
The Gold Rush guys?
The Gold Rush Guys. I like that answer. It sounds like the name of a sitcom. The Gold Rush Guys, Wednesdays at 8 on ABC. Now, in our world, a Swiss immigrant that we know as John Sutter came to California in 1839. And 10 years later, he hired an American carpenter named James C. Marshall to build a mill on his land. And that carpenter found gold in the river. Over there, it was much the same. A Swiss immigrant named Johann Sutter came in 1839. He did not anglicize his name, but he did live in the same place, and he did hire James C. Marshall, an illegal immigrant, to build a mill. And I think you can guess what happened next. Or can you? In our world, the California Gold Rush brought thousands of people from all over the world. Only a few got rich, but many of them stayed and made a permanent mark on the region, which got statehood just 1 year later. Over there, the Mexican government feared an influx of foreigners. To dissuade them, they required any foreign national entering the state at the ports of San Diego, Los Angeles, or San Francisco to have $300 with them. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But that's almost $10,000 in today's money. They also barred Americans from entering altogether, although Americans still got in by pretending to be British or Canadian, or by taking the dangerous overland route. But once again, Mexico trumped that by using its great human capital, offering Mexicans cheap transportation up the coast and exemption from the $300 rule if they wanted to try their luck in the gold fields. This move brought more than enough Mexicans to ensure that they would always be the majority in the region. Now let's come back to our world. We had a situation where America gained 500,000 square miles of land. And Washington invited authorities in California, New Mexico, and Deseret, that's what they called Utah, to submit proposals for statehood. This led the southern slaveholding states to fear being outnumbered in the Senate and to advance proposals of their own for extending slavery into the new territories. This led to compromises that satisfied no one and ultimately led to the Civil War. Over there, Southern fears were mitigated. No new states could be carved out of territory that America didn't have, and the territory of Oregon, peacefully acquired from the British, was far too underpopulated to get immediate statehood. In our world, General Zachary Taylor, hero of the Mexican War, was elected president in 1848. Over there, no war meant no glory for Taylor. Daniel Webster, a so-called cotton Whig who believed that preserving the Union was more important than ending slavery, won the election. Because he didn't have to allay Southern fears, Webster's government did not have to pass a compromise bill in 1850. There was no Fugitive Slave Act, and not much of anything really. Slavery just sat there like a festering sore on the body politic for Webster's entire term of office. Webster fell ill with cirrhosis in 1852 and announced that he would not seek re-election. His vice president, Millard Fillmore, sought the nomination at the National Convention in Baltimore, but was beaten by General Winfield Scott. Fillmore still got to be president, though. Webster died on October 24, 1852, just 9 days before the election. Fillmore was sworn in as the 13th president, unlucky 13, and served out the final days of Webster's term as a lame duck. Election winner Franklin Pierce was sworn in the following March. In both worlds, Pierce was a terrible president who made exactly the same mistakes. Over there, the failure to acquire California did not entirely stop Western expansion. That America still held the vast lands of the prairies, which held great potential for agriculture and would be the route for a future railway to Oregon. Growth here would one day mean statehood, and that would mean an upset in the balance of the Senate. Man, that issue was more persistent than herpes. But then an Illinois legislator named Stephen Douglas advocated the doctrine of popular sovereignty, which held that each new territory should be allowed to decide whether to allow slavery within its borders. And this doctrine was contained in the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 that set up those heartland territories. And guess what happened? People from both sides of the issue flooded into Kansas. Violence flared between the sides. In both worlds, it was bleeding Kansas. And in both worlds, it was a major step on the road to civil war. Their civil war was pretty much the same as ours. It ended with a Northern victory, Lincoln's assassination, and the end of slavery. Reconstruction happened, so it looks like Old Man Celsius was right. Even without the Mexican Cession, civil war proved inevitable. But there were differences in the aftermath of their war. With San Francisco in Mexican hands, that America built its transcontinental railway on a more northerly route, running westward from Minneapolis across Dakota and Montana territories, and forking near the end, with one line going to Portland and the other going to a small village on the shores of Puget Sound. That small village grew into the city of Seattle and became the #1 West Coast port for that America. Your assignment is to dig into the materials I've brought back from that world and write a 2,000-word essay. You might compare and contrast the GDP of their America with ours, or do the same with the two Mexicos. You might compare and contrast the cities of the two worlds. Try Seattle, St. Louis, Minneapolis, San Francisco, Los Angeles, or San Diego. Or maybe look at their entertainment industry. With their Los Angeles in Mexico, their movie studios sprang up in Miami. What difference did that make? Those essays are due next class. I look forward to reading them. Class dismissed. Hi, I'm Gary Wheeler. Alternate History 100 is a labor of love with the twin goals of entertaining you and making you think. If you like what you heard today, please hit the subscribe button, give us a like, and tell your friends about us. Your word of mouth can really help this channel grow. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, keep thinking and make some history of your own.
The preceding was a work of fiction and should not be taken as actual history.